So this is the second video on graphing rational functions. The first one, if you're not familiar with how to do this, go back to part 1. So the function here is g of x equals 3x plus 5 over x plus 2. Okay. Remember the steps we want to go through. We want to factor the rational function if possible. The numerator and denominator here are already simplified, so there's nothing really we can do there. Okay. Next thing we want to do is find the intercepts. All right. So the x-intercept is when g of x here is 0. All right. So that would mean the numerator would have to be 0 in order for this to be an x-intercept. So what we want to do is we want to take this 3x plus 5 and set it equal to 0. Okay. When you solve that, you get an x-intercept of negative 5 over 3. Okay. So if you've got your graph beside of you, go ahead and plot that point. Okay. Negative 5/3. All right. The y-intercept, we want to plug in 0 for both these x's, so those go away. Okay. So the the y-intercept is going to be what's left over there. Positive 5 over positive 2. Okay, so 5 halves. So that's 2 points we already have that we can graph, okay? And that's going to make things a little bit easier. All right. Next thing we want to do, the vertical asymptote. All right. Again, we're going to talk about removable discontinuities in the future. These are all going to have vertical asymptotes. We want to take this denominator, set it equal to 0, and that gives me a vertical asymptote at negative 2. So we're going to have a vertical asymptote at negative 2, and the graph won't touch or cross that at any point in time. All right. Finally, the horizontal asymptote, we've got the degree in the numerator is 1, the degree in the denominator is 1. Those are the same degree, okay? So remember from a previous video on finding horizontal asymptotes, it's going to be the leading coefficient of that numerator divided by the leading coefficient of the denominator. So that's 3 over 1 or 3, okay? So remember the horizontal asymptote here at y equals 3. That's the end behavior of the graph is going to approach 3, going to negative infinity as x goes to negative infinity and as x goes to positive. So let's look at the behavior approaching the vertical asymptote. We're going to come at the vertical asymptote negative 2 from the left, okay? So I'm going to start out with negative 3, okay? That's to the left of negative 2. It's far enough away though, and we're going to get progressively closer like we did in the previous example, okay? So when you plug in negative 3 here for x, you're going to get a positive 4 for y, okay? We want to get progressively closer to this negative 2 coming from the left so we can see what's happening to y. So let's go to negative 2.5. Okay, when we plug in negative 2.5 up here, you get a positive 5. So you can tell we're getting bigger. So we can already maybe assume that we're going to be approaching positive infinity. But we always want to make sure we test a few numbers just to make sure we haven't made a calculation error. Okay, so let's plug in negative 2.1. We're really close to negative 2 now. We're still coming from the left though. And when we plug that in, we get 13, okay? So our pattern here is that we're getting increasingly larger. You can plug in negative 2.01, and you would get a larger y value here, okay? So what we would say then is that as x approaches negative 2 from the left side, that y is going to approach positive infinity, okay? Now, let's come at that vertical asymptote from the right and see what happens, okay? So let's start out with negative 1. So we're to the right of negative 2. All right, and we get a positive 2, okay? Let's get a little bit closer to negative 2 coming from the right, so negative 1.5. Let's plug in negative 1.5 up here, do all the calculations, and you get a positive 1. So you can see we're getting smaller as we're getting closer to negative 2 coming from the right side. But let's get a little bit closer. Let's plug in negative 1.9 and see if we get a negative value, and we do. There, okay, so it's going to be negative 7. All right, so you can see as we get closer and closer and closer to negative 2 coming from the right side, we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can see that's increasing. The rate that we're getting smaller is growing, okay? So what we say there as x approaches negative 2 from the right side, that y is going to go down to negative infinity, okay? So we know we're going to have a graph that's going to look like this, okay? Coming from the left, and over here we're going to have a piece that's looking like that, okay? So the end behavior, again, we just want to plug in, a really large negative number here and just see what happens when we do that. Remember, we should be approaching 3. It's just a matter of which direction we're coming from. So as x approaches negative infinity, as x gets negative going to the left over here, we get positive 3.001. So it looks like we're going to be coming from above. Okay, as x approaches negative infinity, y is going to approach 3. from above. Okay, let's plug in a pretty large positive number. So as x approaches positive infinity, we're going to come from below 3, but again, we should still be approaching this 3 value. But notice we're a little bit less than 3. So what we say there is x approaches positive infinity, y is going to approach 3 from below. Okay, so let's graph that function, and we'll be done. So the graph of this function, g of x equals 3x plus 5 over x plus 2, okay, we found we had a vertical asymptote at x equals -2. We had a horizontal asymptote at y equals 3, okay? My x-intercept was at -5/3 here, okay? My y-intercept was at 5/2 or 2.5, okay? And thinking about the behavior, okay, we'll go ahead and come from the left side. So -2 was my vertical asymptote. As we approach -2 from the left, remember we said we were approaching, I missed the point there, but that's okay. So we're approaching negative infinity, and as x approached positive infinity, we were approaching 3 from below. Okay, so that's what that piece is going to look like. On the left side, remember we know we're approaching positive infinity as we come from the left. We were approaching 3 from above as we went to negative infinity. Let's plot a couple points there just to make sure we've got it. So it's -3, 4 was on the graph. Okay, so we know it's going to look like this and like that. Okay, so there's the graph of g of x equals 3x plus 5 over x plus 2.